Well, hello to you all from Chicago, where it is the first day of summer. Thanks, Brianna and your team, for organizing the workshop and for inviting me to contribute. I'm really sorry I can't be with you in person this year, and for this workshop in particular. Unfortunately, the vagaries of the visa system dictate that I'm unable to leave the US at the moment. I am with you in spirit, however. The subject of this workshop is as extensive as it is crucial. So, given the time constraints, and without the luxury of knowing what others have said or will say, I'll try to confine my remarks to a few niche concerns from my own relevant experience, gained in both music composition and data sonification design. So I prepared a script which, in the interests of time, I'll read. My experience has mostly been with large multivariate datasets, such as from the stock market and, in more recent years, digital network traffic, while my students have worked with various social media feeds and astronomical data. I particularly like to work with real-time data, which imposes its own delights and foibles. You will notice that I've differentiated my activities into composing and sonification designing. While they have their differences, they also have their similarities, at least for me, because composing has always had an overt design element to it. Also, while there are different motivations which dictate different modus operandi and evaluation criteria, they both require the same type of clarity in the sonic articulation of ideas. A typical sonification goes through 5 phases, and I've structured my remarks in keeping with these phases, and I'll finish with some added comments on aesthetics. The 5 phases I've identified are 1. Pre-design, 2. Composition, which includes some covert evaluation, overt evaluation, 4. Redesign, and 5. Delivery and continued operation. Phase 1. Pre-design. Before a single sound is produced, the aims and uses of the sonification and perhaps the expected outcomes are made explicit. These are mostly generic project management undertakings, including access to appropriate and reliable data in a timely manner. Of course, we know that this is not always easy, but that is a topic for another workshop. Phase 2. Composing a sonification or set of sonifications. For any evaluation to take place, let us not forget that there needs to have been a sonification created in the first place. The designer's main task is to develop a metaphorical model or models which will enable the listener's acquisition of relevant information in the detail and variety needed, bearing in mind the particular perceptual and other affordance restrictions in play. In addition to experience with using cognitive metaphors and other analogical devices, this compositional design phase requires an articulated understanding and sensitivity to the scaling, melding, and separation of sound complexes, along with their additive and subtractive parametric redundancies over various time frames. Experienced designers bring considerable embodied knowledge to the task, often acquired over thousands of hours of engaging with the way physical, psychophysical, and conceptual elements interact. Designing is invariably iterative. That is, there are ad hoc, somewhat covert evaluation processes according to criteria which may or may not have been made explicit, built into the designing process itself, during which psychoperceptual adjustments are made. There are currently no satisfactory empirically derivable solutions to the selection and optimization process in this activity, certainly not without the assistance of artificial intelligence. My purpose in pointing this out is not to support the inculcation of a cabal of designers going about their secret heuristic business, but to emphasize that, for various reasons, too detailed to go into here, given that sonification designs are at least as complex and arguably more covert than visualization designs, if sonification designs are to be a viable generic mode of communication and engagement, then there is a pressing need for a coordinated agenda in sonification design science. An extremely ambitious program might be, for example, a parallel enunciation to Buckminster Fuller's synergetics research, which could be extended by AI techniques to make selection and presentation of alternatives by human designers, both novice and experienced, more robust. Phase 3, overt evaluation. It seems probable that others in this evaluation workshop will deal with the analytical techniques necessary for this phase, so I will not tarry on it, other than to say, 1. Clearly, extensive multivariate analysis is essential in the evaluation process, and 2. It is vital to distinguish the difference between an analysis of aims fulfillment, those previously projected outcomes, and identification of the causes of the test results. This might succinctly be summarized by the adage, that is not equivalent to because. Phase 4, redesign. In addition to my previous comments on design, I would like you to seriously consider the proposition that designing is a practice distinct from scientific, engineering, and art-making practices, a third way of thinking, if you like. The iterative synthesis of highly multifactorial solutions make design an inherently messy business. The most thorny issues in the redesign phase is, given the complex interactions of non-orthogonal dimensions in a particular design solution, it is rarely possible to be confident that tweaking one parameter or another, to say nothing of multiple parameters simultaneously, will improve the auditory display in the manner intended. There's been quite a lot said about the role of aesthetics in sonification, and I notice that there is a considerable interest as indicated by internet searches. So I would like to conclude my presentation by making some remarks about aesthetics. I think much of what has been said about the subject is confusing and unhelpful, mostly because it assumes aesthetics is primarily about beauty, which it is often assumed is based on universal values. This somewhat naive approach is a trap, especially to budding sonifiers. Today, the term aesthetic is used to identify the quality of unifying sensory experiences of an event, an object, or an environment. For a variety of reasons, different listeners around the globe may have wildly different emotional experiences with the same artifacts. Inasmuch as the quality of the sensory experience evokes emotions in the listener, those emotions are components of the listener's own aesthetic, bound by their cultural, time, place, and perhaps other environmental factors. The idea that an aesthetic can be added post hoc to an otherwise unpalatable object of experience, like sugar and salt are added to a dish to taste, in the final stages of preparation, is a fallacy, and will invariably be recognized as such. Attempts to impose such musicalisms on a sonification invariably appear as false flavor enhancers, and are more likely to increase blandness or confusing misdirections than assist comprehension or palatability. Clarity and integrity will always eclipse pretty or nice. In the second half of the 20th century, a theory of aesthetic engagement has developed which recognizes that a person's participation in the appreciative process contains more creative perceptual involvement than the subjective appreciation of the beautiful than are recognized in Kant's theory, and certainly more than considered by Baumgarten. Aesthetic engagement rejects the separation between the perceiver and the object of perception in favor of a contextual field in which the reciprocity and continuity of appreciative experience is perceptually active, direct, and intimate. In closing, I do hope that these preliminary remarks do not appear too obscure or, heaven forbid, banal. Historically speaking, sonification is a relatively new practice, and I believe we are only just scratching the surface on discovering a variety of effective techniques. At the risk of being accused of making an opportunistic plug, I have a new book which covers issues I've touched on in this talk and many more besides in more detail than has been possible here. Entitled Sonification Design, From Data to Intelligible Sound Fields, and some 15 years in the writing, it is due out in August, published by Springer Fellow. If you would like an overview of the book, please feel free to email me and I'd be pleased to send it to you. Thank you for listening, and bon ami for the rest of the conference.